Welcome back to a Farmer's Breakfast Show right here from a Farmer's Media. And as promised, we will be trying to see how this particular discussion that we've been having, how can we be able to have the same discussion, but be able to bring in some of the experts who are doing some amazing work. And we will be discussing this with Dr. Robert Mwakio, who we are hoping to get in touch in the next few seconds, who will be telling us what is this. Daktari, habari gani? Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
Very fine. This is Noah Nasiali from A Farmer's Media.
I'm watching live.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for giving us some time. And we wanted to discuss a few things about what is happening in Gabon in relation to the Africa Climate Week. But most importantly, how do we place smallholder farmers in the discussion?
Yeah, the final person who actually suffers from global climate change.
I'm actually being told to ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Robert Mwakio. I'm actually an expert in sustainable development, sustainable agriculture, more so urban agriculture is what I major in. And
We are losing you.
regarding climate change. So for all those who follow me, you can get me you can just Google Robert Mwakio. We have written articles on so many things on agriculture. I hope I can be heard. Huh? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Basically, I've introduced myself, Robert Mwakio, doctor, and anything sustainable development, you can ask me. Also, when we're tackling climate change and agriculture, which we'll be discussing today.
Brilliant. So, what does Africa Climate Week hope to achieve?
Well, there's a lot. Where is Africa in terms of climate change? You see, we always lag behind when it comes to discussing climate change, and most of the time during the convention, the United Nations Global Climate Change Conventions, we are normally left behind because the major decision makers are the big countries, they actually called the Big Seven, the major industrialized nations in the world that actually have quite a say in terms of global climate change. But where is Africa? Africa is actually suffering from the impacts of global climate change, despite us not being very industrialized, yeah? Because big countries like China and the United States and India actually emitting a lot of carbon to the atmosphere, and unfortunately we all share the same atmosphere. So countries that do not emit much of the carbon emissions are the ones suffering. So Africa as a whole has to, come up and have a say in terms of policy making, in terms of policy making and policy implementation when it comes to global change, the global climate change, because we are normally behind as a continent in decision making.
Good. So when you talk about Africa being behind decision making, does it mean that our countries and African countries are not willing to be able to have this done right, or what does that specifically mean?
I mean, we are doing well. Like in Africa, remember we are not really industrialized per se to say that we are contributing a lot to carbon emission, but not that we are not. We are really doing that, especially with impact of urbanization, rapid urbanization, industrialization. So many people are buying cars. We have a lot of emissions from industries around the big cities. Rapid modernization, industrialization is also an impact, but it's not majorly felt to the whole world compared to other countries. But we as an African continent have to put a check, because we are under the Kyoto Protocol that checks each country's emission in terms of carbon emission. So that is where we see countries coming to buy they buy carbon reserves from countries in Africa, because some of the emissions we have are very low compared to the big countries' quota in terms of carbon emission. So as a continent, we are not saying that we are not prone to pollution, because Africa is one of the fastest industrializing continents in the world. We are having that impact of industrialization because we are moving more from agricultural development to industrial, where we are seeing industries coming up left, right, and center, and with that also has an impact on the already spoiled atmosphere that we have. So as Africa, like you asked, we also have a say in maintaining, like Kenya, for example. We also have to maintain our carbon emission because we are under a cap put by the Kyoto Protocol. We are supposed to emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So we also need to check on all this.
So now, Daktari, let me ask you. I would like us to break the jargon. We because smallholder farmers want to see basically two things. They want to see how are these activities, how do they bring in revenue or help them increase revenue? Because, as a farmer, you're a business person, So there's a discussion that has been going on about carbon credits. What does what do you understand? What do you mean when you talk about carbon credits? What is this carbon credits, and what is its value?
See, what I think I just mentioned it when I was discussing something. I see each country has a credit or a cap that has been put in terms of the emission of carbon dioxide. Yeah. So let's say a country like India cannot be compared to a country like Rwanda, for example, in terms of carbon emission. So each country has a cap. Let's say, I don't have the figures exactly on how much carbon dioxide per milligram that they're supposed to emit. Let's say, for example, let me just put a cubic meter. Let's say in all countries are put under 1,000. Yeah? So you'll find a country like India releases about 800, give or take, cubic emission of carbon, and compared to Rwanda that does about 20. So since India will continue its production, so it will end up buying credits in terms of, you see, the difference, the emission cap that has been put here. So that is where the carbon credit definition comes in, where a country like India buys the credit or the cap as which that it is supposed. Let's say Rwanda has been put to release an excess of 1,000, but they only release 20. So what India does, this is just an example. India buys, let's say, 200 to carbon the emission that it already has. So that is where the carbon credit does. So what happens, people decided to get into business, like African farmers are deciding to sell the carbon credits to bigger companies or bigger countries so that they can be able to, do agricultural practices. But that is a bit complex. Maybe we can set aside some day to discuss a whole topic on carbon credit and carbon emission. because it's a bit complex when we are to discuss this issue.
But let me ask you, what is the value of one carbon credit, and how do you? I mean, do you need an eighth of an acre, half an acre? Are there specific crops that determine whether you qualify for carbon credits? Is it something that you are paid over a longer time, or is it a short time investment?
You see, I don't know how I can explain it. Yeah. Remember, the carbon. Okay, I don't know. I'm trying to look at how I can be able to explain the emission reduction purchase agreement, yeah, of the contracts which countries have to do when it comes to carbon credits, yeah, and what did you ask? Probably I might have not.
No, I was asking because there's this talk about carbon credit. And it is, farmers are being told that yes, as much as agriculture contributes to the carbon emissions, farmers can be able to participate in this. And so we have things like zero to minimum tillage. We have specific crops that have that count more. Things like cover crops and the rest. So are there? What is the value of this one carbon credit? Some people are talking about $30 over 1 year. Is it if I have 30 acres or if I have 2 acres? How does that? I know we cannot exhaust that now, but just in a summary, and then now we go back into so that we bring that topic and help farmers understand the importance of Africa Climate Week towards the road to COP27.
Okay, I don't have the exact figures because what I really know, what we are talking about is probably in the bigger scale of 1 ton of carbon dioxide sold in terms of big lump sum sale of carbon credit. So I don't have the total figures going down to the agricultural farmers as per now. That is why I'm saying maybe we might need to discuss this on a later topic, yeah. But most, like I remember being during, like I think in the early 2000s or late 2008, 9 there, I remember we were working on a project on carbon credits in Coast, where I remember farmers were being encouraged to plant a specific kind of tree, yeah? And I can't remember the name of that tree, but for that they were being paid, I think, $50 per acre for the carbon credit. But I do not have official information to this. Probably we can
talk this yes
for a later date.
Okay, so now let me ask something. Africa Climate Week, smallholder farmer, what is the disconnect?
Now, you see, climate change has as the ultimate effect to the common farmer. Like you're seeing the issues that are affecting farmers right now in terms of delayed rainfall pattern or distorted rainfall patterns, which have like here in Kajiado, which actually is experiencing one of the worst drought situations. You're seeing the common farmer is actually suffering so much when it comes to climate change, and what at the end of the day, what this convention, which is basically being funded by the United Nations, it's supposed to be helping African farmers who understand the impact of climate change in terms of production. You see, we as Africans are really used to weather-controlled kind of climate agriculture, where we know that we're supposed to plant during the before the rainy season. Rainy season takes this amount of time. We'll be harvesting before this time. So at the end of the day, we are left wondering what is the impact of this climate change to the farmer as we're experiencing right now. So this Botswana Global Adaptation Week, yeah, actually we are looking at how farmers can be able to adapt to the major changes in climate change. Yeah, that's one of the most important thing. So they are also looking at something called the National Adaptation Plans, which is being, the branch of United Nations that looks at the climate change is the UNFCCC. I think you know about that.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, the one that came up with the Kyoto Protocol.
Yes.
And the Paris Agreement. So remember, we are looking at several things that we look like, especially transformational agriculture. Remember, we've discussed this so many times. Transformational agriculture is how can we be able to adapt to climate change? Yeah. So we're looking at adaptations such as doing greenhouses, having irrigation, which is very important for farming, because irrigation is the next thing. We cannot continue relying so much on rainfall patterns because we're seeing how much distorted they are. So many guidelines are being formed, and such conventions come up with guidelines and protocols of which will be adopted by member organizations, Kenya being one of them. So at the end of the event, they'll be coming up with guidelines of which is going to help individual countries form formulations or guidelines, yeah, which also will be adopted by United Nations Environmental Program. For example, now the common farmer, how are we going to have an impact out of this?
Exactly, because see, the Africa Climate Week is what in Glasgow last year in COP26. What happened is that they say that we need to have regional-based climate weeks. Weeks or months prior to the main COP events, but these were protocols that have always been there. This is the fifth one happening in Africa. What has changed? Is it important? Is it that Africa is just filling in the gap of, oh yeah, we need to talk about Africa, and it's the same thing going around. Africans are the ones who are suffering the most when it comes to climate change effects, because the droughts are there. Yes, we also have droughts. We have fires in California and the rest. We saw the other day in Germany there were serious floods. And I mean, as we were discussing this, there's just an article that actually I've actually seen. The developing worlds are really suffering out of this. You know, there's actually some floods happening in Pakistan, and it is actually Antonio Guterres actually has said that these floods are epochal and are monsoon on steroids. Why do we keep on discussing? Is there anything that can be done as we keep on discussing, so that instead of setting new policies and having too many conferences, there is developing? We're actually saying that we are monitoring, these activities are going on right and stuff like that. Can we be able to have that? Because sometimes it feels like, yes, discussions are going on, but it's still always a new discussion and not monitoring and saying, we tried this, it didn't work, we tried that, didn't work. We are not seeing a serious sensitization on growing trees. And if it's trees, is it all trees that are carbon friendly, or are there fruit trees, or what is it?
No, you also need to understand that each country in the world is a signatory to such protocols, yeah. And remember, like the Kyoto Protocol, where so many all different countries were told to come up with individual policies that will dictate or will be able to check on the emission of greenhouse gases, yeah, and they put a cap to different countries, and also in terms of funding, which countries will be able to fund. Like we look at the developed countries funding to enable these protocols or these laid out policies go down to the ground level. So you have to realize that so many of these countries are, especially in Africa, dictated by some of the outcomes or some of the policies that have been established through such conventions. And remember, Okay, you asked about why there are so many of these meetings or conventions all the time. Remember, there are also a lot of money that is there's
hiyo jile wanasema tuambieni ukweli, kuna pesa pia, kuna padia mapo.
There's always fundings, like there's a lot of funding that have been put aside to come up with policies. And probably Africans are the best when it comes out to making policies, but very poor implementation. Now the implementation comes in when you start having you're seeing the monsoon that is really causing devastation in Pakistan. But now, don't forget we also have our own problems. The flood period in Kenya that comes over November, December there, yeah? In places like Budalangi and the likes. Remember, I was just reading briefly before we got into this conversation. 20 years, I mean, if we do not, there was a report that was put, I think, by NASA, I think by NASA, is that if we do not do anything about climate change within 20 years from now, if no policies are done, or if we are not checking, or we are not doing radical measures to check on carbon emission, in 20 years it's going to be catastrophic. We'll be having very bad drought situations. We'll be having severe famine. We'll be having monsoons. We'll be having floods, and it's going to be worse. Now, where does Africa come in? Now, we have our own, we need to come down with our own policies. Like here in Kenya, we are signatories to the United Nations and the UN. We also have UNEP here in Kenya. But you remember, at the end of the day, it's the individual farmer. It's that person who goes to the farm who actually suffers. Now, the country, the government has the mandate to protect the farmers from such radical or such issues that comes out from drought situation. What is happening now, here in Kenya, where so many places are experiencing very severe drought situation, we have funds that have been put aside. Now, such funds should be channeled to come up with, to look at some of the things that they're discussing in this convention. There are eight strategies that they are looking at here. But one of them is regenerative food production, and another one is looking at water, natural resources, equitability, and inclusivity. Yeah, but also then we also look at lifelong environmental stewardship. Yeah. So under lifelong environmental stewardship, how can an individual person like you and me help in coming up with strategies that will help the country, avert the issue of climate change? Simple. Tell people, plant trees. Yeah. Now that is where the enforcement is a challenge to us, like in Kenya right now. I've seen places like, I've worked in Rwanda for I think 2 years, where they teach young children from young age to plant trees. You see, if we can have policies that start even from primary level of education, yeah, to show guys, hey, if we don't do this, this will happen. So these are the strategies that need to be looked at. Train farmers, have conventions, have meetings, tell people this is how you can do it from your individual point of view. Plant trees.
Is it possible to have is it possible to have this information broken down in even local dialects for farmers to see their role? Because I think it's more of a scare to farmers being told, this is agriculture is doing this, and then there are other people who are benefiting. If you look at which is a controversial discussion, but we will be having this discussion, is how much have farmers in Africa benefited over the period that carbon credit has been there? How much money? So that when you sensitize them, you don't sensitize them on carbon credits, but you sensitize them on better soil structures, healthier soils, other alternatives to farming, probably even different food that has different test buds, So That is a discussion I think we need to have, and we need to have it especially during this time, because this is the Africa Climate Week, but very few farmers even know that there's something called Africa Climate Week. So with that in mind, I want to ask you, Daktari, is it ignorance on the part of smallholder farmers, or they just don't feel part of this and so they don't care about it?